However, we're live.
We're live. Okay. So we're live, everybody. And today we're just following through and hearing from a couple members of the advisory board on state aid for school construction. This was commissioned by this committee, went through the legislature a couple of years ago. And we have your report. I don't know which order you two would like to go in this. It doesn't matter to us, I don't think. So whoever wants to go first.
I think Michael will start with his slide deck.
And go together. Okay.
We'll do it together.
Okay.
We have a little routine here. We practiced earlier this morning.
Okay. That's fine. So by the way, before we do that, if you could we'll introduce the committee and then you identify yourselves for the record. So Senate Education Committee on January 7th. Over there, we have one member absent who has, I think, what everybody's getting, some sort of the flu or cold or whatever, and home for the day. But next to what would have been Senator Ron Hinsdale, we have
Dr. Hashim from Rutland County. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Seth Baumgartz from the Bennington Senate District.
Terry Williams, we're also representing Rutland County.
Steve Heffernan, Addison County District.
So then if you could just introduce yourselves for the record, name, town, and the fact that you're from the task force or from the advisory board.
Go ahead, Michael.
I'll start. Nice to see everyone again this year here. Michael Gaughan, I'm the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank, Burlington resident, and I suppose for you, Senator Baumgartz, former National Development Council Grow America employee some years back. So
through that, okay.
So yeah, pleasure to join.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Epstein. I'm an architect and principal at Truex Collins. We're an architecture and interior design firm in Burlington. I live in Shelburne. We do work all over the state and a little in New Hampshire and other places, working on school projects. So I've been involved with the trying to get a school construction aid program reinstated for about 8 years now. And I have both experience at that level, but also boots on the ground working with individual districts throughout the state.
So I know you have some slides you want to try to get up.
Yeah, let me start with that. And I should say I've joined David in this effort going back to really, I think the first conversation I had on this was January or February 2020. Obviously, some things came to disrupt that conversation, but we this has been a perennial topic, obviously. Lots of deferred maintenance. So I just sent a request to get the ability here. Okay, great. Okay, so the bond bank's role here is that we are the primary entity by which the financing for school districts is occurring, and that has been the case. It was, in fact, many of you I've spoken with in the past, but there are some new members. But in 1969, 1970, the bond bank was really created to facilitate school financing. At that, as you'll see in a moment, well, here, why don't I just give some context to it, actually. This is the history of school bond issuance in Vermont, starting with the inception of the bond bank. And our first deal was in 1970. On an inflation-adjusted basis, that first transaction was our largest ever. And that was because there had been a large amount of school construction in the 60s. The local banks had done the financing for that, but were different regulatory environment, different capitalization, and the story is they didn't have the willingness to provide long-term financing. So you see some vestigial parts of this in statute where you can roll a bond anticipation notes for up to 10 years, and that's driven by what was occurring in the 60s. So there's a bit of a capital crunch, and that was the genesis for the creation of the bond bank. We pool loans together, issue municipal bonds that are credit enhanced by the state, and then get a great rate for every community in the state, highly equitable in terms of access. So fast forward 50 years, It's not a huge surprise to us that we have this large amount of deferred maintenance, given, you know, the largest amount of investment in schools was back in the late 60s. So, and then we see, this is, I guess, a note for all of the slides I'm about to present. This is the bond bank's data, our portfolio data, our history, as well as Burlington and Winooski. To the extent that there are private bank loans out there with other schools that we're not aware of, they just aren't reflected. But I do think this is, you know, 90+% of the picture of school debt out there.
You will notice that in the 90s, there's a little bit of a spike, and that was related to a population increase. You know, what we see a lot of schools built in the late 60s, added to in the 90s. Often, though, no renovations done to the work done in the late 60s, early 70s. And you see now we're on the next 30-year cycle now.
Yeah, and
So
go ahead.
Since you sort of started this discussion, how did the schools, the districts that built schools in the 50s, how did they finance them? If you were, because there was no bond bank.
Great question. You know, there are, I'm not sure is the short answer. If you go and you look at, there's a disclosure website called from the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board called EMMA. And if you go back and look through Vermont's history, periodically there were public bond issuances for schools outside of the bond bank. Really hasn't occurred since the 90s and 80s. Up until really around the time of the Great Recession, maybe a little bit before, the municipal securities business was a little bit more lucrative than it is now. And so you can make a fair amount of money doing a very small bond deal, whereas that's not really the case anymore. And certainly not with the bond bank looking out for our towns. We keep it pretty tight. So yeah, my sense is it was a combination of banks and bond deals. Okay, so what's happened in the time that David and I have been speaking to members of the various committees about school construction in 2020 is that there's just been crazy cost inflation. And I think this just sets the stage for where we are now and getting ahead of this issue as soon as possible. The bond bank keeps borrowing rates really low. We borrow at a AA+ tax exempt rate, whereas which is well below construction inflation, and is really relevant to the conversation both with what to do with the legacy school district debt, as David will explain in a moment, but also obviously going forward and trying to get ahead of things so we can save money in the long run. But I wanted to use this as a jumping off point for a point David has been making that's really was really important to the work of the committee.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about in the committee was that it almost felt like the premise for our first report was, you know, what to do about existing school district debt, as if it was posing it as a negative. And one of the things we talked about was that, you know, you could turn that argument on its head and say, well, if a district has taken care of their building and they've invested in it, then that's a positive thing that they did, and that you know, just like if you were a commercial, you were buying commercial real estate, you wouldn't want to buy buildings in bad shape. You want to buy buildings in good shape. So if you're merging with a district that has taken care of their buildings and has some debt, at least it's a known quantity, and it's not an unknown quantity. And you can see here that with the rampant cost escalation, you know, like take Winooski, for example, a project we were involved with in. Their project was $57 million. It would cost $120 million to do that today, and that goes up every year by 4 or 5%. So what we talked about quite a bit was that, you know, debt isn't necessarily a negative thing. Now, maybe politically sensitive and emotional, but in a dollar and cents ways, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that was a point that had some resonance with the committee. In terms of existing school debt and its overall size, gives you a picture of total aggregate debt service with the caveats that I mentioned before per year. 2026 is a little bit of a outlier. There were some post-Great Recession special bonds called qualified school construction bonds that have a sinking fund associated with them. So this debt service looks artificially high, but generally you're talking about just under $50 million that's occupied in debt service from the Ed Fund. And while that's a lot of money, it's also a fairly small amount in comparison to $1.6 billion that's going out to schools from the Ed Fund. And so I think this is the first slide of many that'll just speak to this is an important issue, but I'd say in the grand scheme of things, legacy debt is not really the huge cost driver. It's definitely going to be debt going forward. But that said, the debt is not equally distributed. So let's take a look at that. This just gives you the raw numbers on the next page. One note is, the bond bank really is doing our best to keep rates low. Our weighted average interest cost for school debt in the portfolio is 3.7%. And a lot of that was because of us being smart about how we issued bonds during the period of zero interest rate policy from the Fed. That environment's obviously going to change. That's not necessarily going to be the case going forward, but on a relative basis, we keep it pretty efficient. So I think this is probably one of the most powerful tables we put together. We went through a couple of iterations of looking at the numbers with the committee, and this one I thought was impactful. Obviously, I think it's well known that Chittenden County has been successful in passing bonds in Burlington and Colchester, Milton, and Winooski, and that's certainly reflected in here, where you see a concentration of overall school debt that's well above their percentage of school age population. There's also some concentration in Franklin and Windsor counties that have also had successful bonds. But I think the takeaway point really from this slide is if you strip away the top 10 largest borrowers that are out there, you are only left with $72 million in outstanding debt, which is just an extremely small amount and doesn't tell us anything we don't know. Our median amount of debt service as a percent of budget is about 1.8% or so, and national medians for similarly sized schools are about 5.5%. So that just speaks to the level of deferred maintenance, which we all know about and have known about for several years. But in terms of addressing this problem, or not this problem, but in terms of addressing this issue, it's just relatively small. Even baking in the more recently approved bonds, you just have an amount of debt that is a modest amount of the overall Ed Fund. But this does give you a sense of its distribution. And so in the scope of the report, we endeavored to lay out the potential options in the event of consolidation, how you would treat legacy debt. Not all of them are created equal. David can speak to that. I think a couple observations on those. We just wanted to really lay out all the possibilities. Didn't really provide a recommendation, but certainly precedent has been that under consolidation that has occurred to date, the bond bank simply changed the obligor name of the debt from the old district to the merged district and sent, had a new place to send the bill. So that's one avenue. As we've discussed in several task force reports over the last couple of years, we think it's really important, alongside the state treasurer's office, to preserve the state's rating, bond rating, that is, because the bond bank can leverage that rating in multitudes. And the way you facilitate that is by making sure any state assistance for construction aid, whether it be prospective or retroactive with regard to legacy debt, is to provide that school aid on a reimbursement basis, which is what Rhode Island has done, and avoids that debt being considered net tax supported debt of the state. So, the bond bank really benefits from the state's rating, but we have the ability to leverage it several times more than the state could without an impact. And certainly the state has a lot of competing demands other than schools. So that's another option. And then the third option, which was kind of interesting, that we discussed, and there are others, but I think these are the three main ones, was that, you could pick some number. We looked at $5 million and just say everything, $5 million and below, we are going to pay off. And it's quite equitable. And what happens if you do that at a cost of 54 million is that you eliminate the debt from all but 13 districts, because the amounts are relatively small. So you just take that issue off the table. And I'm not suggesting that's the right way necessarily. It's just kind of interesting, that a fairly small investment, again, relative to the size of the ed fund, could really take this issue off the table for a lot of districts. What is important in that case is that the money that is used to defease or remove the debt not be bond debt from the state, because it starts to get kind of complicated and more expensive based upon the redemption features of our bonds as to how you defease or legally remove that debt. So it'd be important that it would be like an appropriation, because you have a lot of flexibility that way. So yeah, those are kind of the main points there. And then I know David has some thoughts on how we looked at the various options as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Michael. Go ahead. Is there a question?
Just to make sure we understand it, when you talk about just paying off the 5 million in debt, I think you explained it, but I didn't much sure I understood it.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Who pays
Yeah,
off?
let me give you a visual aid. So I guess in our survey of options, we kind of just said, okay, well, the state through the ed fund could, provide this one-time appropriation from whatever means, and pick some number. And you can see here, this is the list of outstanding debt per school district, and you have to go up pretty high on the list until you get to a school that has more than $5 million. So, if this is really a political issue, a concern of school districts, you could eliminate the debt from a whole, 3/4 of the schools that have debt by picking a number like $5 million. And $54 million, don't get me wrong, that's a ton of money, but that is quite modest in scope of the overall ed fund. So it's just one potential approach. The other approach, and I should say the other approach, which I didn't really cover, is you could pick some vintage year. David spoke to the fact that debt is not a bad thing because of the construction cost inflation. It means you have a well taken care of facility. But if you have older debt that is, approaching the maturity of the underlying loan, then it's not going to be as valuable because it's sort of depreciated during that time. So another way to look at it might be to say, okay, well, we're going to remove debt from the balance sheet of schools that was issued in, I don't know, 2009 or prior. Pick your number. But this is a look at the vintage of outstanding debt that's out there.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to, I think Michael did a great job of kind of laying out what the options were. I just wanted to say a few things, provide a little context into the committee. As Michael said, they weren't all equal. There was concern in the committee about providing a recommendation until we knew what the new districts looked like. Because there was concern about some unintended consequences. For example, if a wealthier district was paired with a less wealthy community, would that cause an undue burden on that less wealthy community? But what we did agree on was that, if you're merging districts and, communities are benefiting from that asset, then they should contribute to the debt repayment for that asset. So, if like say South Burlington is in a district with Burlington and attends the Burlington High School, you don't get the benefit of a brand new school without contributing to the debt payment. So and I think there were other, unintended consequences until the new districts, until the committee felt like, until they could see what the new districts looked like, it was difficult to make a recommendation. But I would say that, we definitely, options 1, 2, and 3 were really the ones that people were talking, and 4 and 5 felt like they were added just to kind of round out all of the options that we could iterate. I think, one issue to think about when you're considering that is, what about retroactive? What about, the Burlingtons, the Winooskis, Colchesters? Is the new school construction program going to provide some debt relief for those communities? One of the things that's happening right now in the state, we see a lot of their clients, is there's a lot of, standing on the sidelines and waiting. And people are not moving forward with taking care of their buildings as much as they would like to. And one of those reasons is, they're waiting for a school construction aid. They're hoping for a school construction aid. And I've tried to explain to them that, there's going to be a priority system. There's not enough money for everybody to get. So, maybe a long time, or the state policy may not support the improvements of the improvements they want to do may not be supported based on policy considerations. But anyway, there is a lot of waiting, and the other, the cost of inaction. There's, I have a client. I won't reveal names, but 10 years ago we started working with them. They wanted to renovate their high school, and it was a $20 million project, and we're still working with them, and now it's an $80 million project. So I think the other, so I think retroactive debt repayment assistance could help, if that was a goal to get districts to move forward, that could help. Obviously the fact that capital construction counts towards the per pupil spending, we hear a lot of discussion regarding trying to avoid that fiscal cliff and that limiting the amount of work that the schools can do. But so anyway, those are just some things to consider when I think when you think about what this whole debt conversation as part of a school construction plan.
So would one district make it really easy?
One district for the state?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what Hawaii is, one district for the entire state.
Yeah, I thought somebody was a superintendent over there. They said it. Having 5
I don't know.
didn't help. But it worked.
Yeah, I think our perspective, and I'm just speaking for the bond bank here, not the committee, is that it's very hard. David has spoken about this. It's very hard to exactly know what the policy objectives are for our next piece of work, which is really trying to build structure around the unfunded state aid program. But from the bond bank's perspective, it's all about cost. And so regardless of where the lines are drawn, I think we're just really interested in advancing projects to start moving ahead as soon as possible on this huge sort of silent liability. We are interested in having a really frank discussion about the overall depreciation level of the existing schools. It might be the one area where we're going to talk about things other than debt and numbers, but it really, I think, is going to be a important discussion about, if that has an FCI of 65, 70% or higher, do we build new? And, is there some, and where do we build new? And is there some sentimental value associated with that existing asset? And so those types of questions are almost agnostic to the district in some ways. It's really about the age of the facility and its overall utilization. And maybe it's in a new district, maybe it's not. But that's certainly where we're going to be focusing our attention.
So you've done a lot of this work, I think, anticipating, am I right about that? You've been sort of anticipating mergers in larger districts? as you're thinking about first, paying off the debt so the next merger is possible?
Yeah, it was part of our legislative mandate for this group is that the first report needed to come up with ideas around the legacy debt. I don't know that that's where we would have started individually, but that is what we're required to do.
I will state it, for me, this has been important because I hadn't realized that the amount of debt out there is really as small as it is. I guess if I really thought about it, I thought I would have, because I knew the construction actually happened the real construction happened quite a while ago, the
Right.
50s, 70s to the 90s.
Right.
So,
Yeah, our next task as a committee now is to put sort of flesh on the bones that are in Act 73 that talk about a framework for a school construction program. And one of the things I think it's a little bit the cart before the horse, because what we really need to be effective is to understand what the policies are going to be. Are we going to create regional comprehensive high schools? Are we, is it the Rhode Island mantra of newer and fewer, or is, what is the strategy? What is the policy goals? Because a school construction program really is a program that implements those policy goals and incentivizes behavior that aligns with those policy goals. So we're looking forward to having that conversation, but I think we're feeling like we're gonna need some good interaction with your committee, with House Ed, and with the Agency of Education to really understand what those goals are.
what is your next report due?
I think it's in 6 months or so. I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't recall. December 15th was our first major date that we had to be concerned about.
Yeah.
And so you're a little bit at the mercy of, waiting for us to, you really can't do too much until you understand where we're actually going.
Yes. Yeah, I think we can, there is some parallel work we could do that could, like, for example, if the framework talks about 20% state participation with different incentives, and it talks about what those incentives might be, and one of them might be sustainable design, energy efficient design. And I think that is agnostic of, school size, district size, classroom size, but there's some of them that are going to be more keenly tied into those types of policy objectives.
So as we went around the state talking to different school districts, and some, I didn't hear anybody actually come and say it, but I got the implication that, we shouldn't waste any money on the school because it's, added on and added on. We have so many significant problems. So you guys didn't categorize these schools that way. Just the figures that were there, the monetary amounts, is that what you figured would have to be put into them? Or is that just what bonds they have right now for debt?
This is exclusively what debt they have outstanding. The task force, there was David, help me here. I think 2023, 2024, it's all blurring together, was the statewide facilities assessments, which are, outside this committee's work, but that was very helpful to understand the overall depletion levels of those assets. And David talked about parallel work. Certainly, we're going to be hyper focused on that threshold for what you keep and where you start new.
Right.
Yeah, in that report, from the task force, which both Michael and I were on in 23, 24, was talked about the idea that at 65% FCI, and what that means is that 65% of the building is depleted or depreciated. So that you might start to consider replacing the building. It's sort of the old car analogy, you know, when do you stop putting money into your old car, you know? And so that, but you know, these are, it was a report that was a series of recommendations, and I think there's a lot of great work in that report and a lot of sound reasoning, but you know, there's no
It's
such
3 years old.
policy. What's that?
That report is 3 years old, but it's out there.
Well, 2 years old, yeah.
So.
It's
so
out there. It's
2
on
years,
the website, I
it's probably
believe.
changed.
What's that?
It's
It's a good starting thing.
okay. 2
Yeah, I
years,
think that
in 2 years, probably, that data has probably changed.
Well, you know, the FCI is a simple ratio of the cost to renovate the building over the cost of replacing the building. So those costs tend to rise together. And so the nice thing about that, the way they do it, is that it often the ratio doesn't change and the percentage doesn't change because both numbers are rising in a similar fashion. Or at a
Thank you.
similar rate.
yeah, the biggest change would probably be reinvestment. And there just hasn't been that much of it.
Right.
Yeah, that has, yeah. So the good news is we have very little debt. The bad news is the buildings are fully depreciated. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
She'll be happy about that.
Yes. That's actually been really interesting and very helpful. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And we may be back in touch as questions come up. But
Yeah,
thanks for the work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nice to see
Yeah,
everyone.
thanks for your time, and yes, definitely use us as a resource. You know, anything we can do to move the ball forward, be happy to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks
All
for your
right,
time.
take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And with that, we're actually done. So until we do a hearing tomorrow on the task force report, soon as happens, hopefully we're going to down to Route 11, bring you a report. Okay.